We are living in the final hours of the year 2018. Good evening and thank you so very much for joining us. This is Channel 1 News Hour, and of course this is the end of the year review. My name is O'Brien Kimani.
And I'm Regina Manyara Gita, and as you well know, we want to put into perspective the business world in as far as 2018 is concerned.
My advice to you, sit back and of course enjoy the show.
Now, the year 2018 started on a dull note for the economy, stressed by incessant political wrangles and weeks of violence, protests due to the contested 2017 presidential elections. In the first quarter of 2018, the economy grew by 5.7% compared to 4.8% recorded in a similar quarter of 2017. However, quarter two growth improved to 6.3% year on year. With you, we bring the expert opinion as O'Brien Kimani brings you the details of how the economy fared during the year under review.
At a time like this last year, the central business district of Nairobi was an all-go zone with opposition supporters engaging in running battles with riot police. These continued for weeks, impacting business negatively and bringing the financial heartbeat of Nairobi to its knees. And this continues to be felt almost 12 months later. The question is, for how long will the impact of those mass protests continue to be felt?
From Nairobi to the western city of Kisumu, this was the order of the day. The bone of contention, disputed August 2017 presidential election. The elongated political task was taking a toll on Kenya's economy. Saiton head of private equity Shiv Arora says the shilling was losing ground and investors at the Nairobi Securities Exchange remained hawkish.
It's definitely been a challenging economic environment. The first low is that private sector credit growth has remained very, very low. It's now at 4.3% versus highs of 22.3% before the interest rate cap that came in. We then saw an amendment to the Act which actually removed the minimum deposit rate rather than actually removing the entire interest rate cap. And that has meant that there's been less and less credit to the private sector. The second is that there have been some sectors that have been very, very strong in terms of their performance. You look at agriculture, horticulture, tea, coffee exports, tourism. They've had very, very good years. But on the other side, when you look at the listed markets, you see that there's been a huge number of companies that have issued profit warnings, which highlights that it's been a very, very challenging economic environment. In terms of foreign investor sentiment, it's also started the year kind of waiting and seeing how we would drag on from the protracted electioneering period. But now as we come towards the end of the year with the rate hikes in the US, you can see that there's been quite a bit of foreign investor sell-off generally across emerging markets.
Consumer prices rose 4.8% year-on-year in January 2018 after a 4.5% gain in the previous month due to escalation of tension which resulted in transport disruptions. The transport sector registered a slower growth of 7.1% compared to 9.4% growth recorded in the same quarter in 2017. The slower growth was attributed to transport disruptions along the Northern Corridor. Leonard Wanjala, the lead economist at Tax Justice Network, says the government needs to safeguard this transportation artery that is critical to the economic well-being of the East African region.
We'll have to play catch-up. This is something that has happened before, and there's always the slowdown, then you have to catch up. In terms of targets, I think we are on course kind of to get to the 6% that we are always aiming for. But then it's always very slow considering the level of the turmoil. As you know, many political scientists have actually done the research according to Kenya, where there's this cycle of kind of a boom and bust, and the bust is mainly within the political space in terms of the economy. So again, it's the normal practice of us having to catch up to the prospects that we have been set for.
The hospitality sector was the biggest loser in the first quarter, with widespread hotel cancellation leading to massive layoffs. The sector is estimated to have expanded by 13.5% compared to 24.5% growth recorded in the first quarter of 2017. However, following a political ceasefire reached between President Uhuru Kenyatta and NASA leader Raila Odinga in March, the economic fortunes of the economy have been improving.
What we are seeing and we'd like to commend is the war on graft and corruption, because that has been one of the most positive, significant steps that have been taken. And it was very great to see the president come out and say that it's not only me to fight corruption. Everyone, if you know someone in your household who is going through it, ensure that you are reporting them to the right agencies. It's taking the stance that was done in Singapore with Lee Kuan Yew when he fought corruption and moved Singapore into one of the fastest growing economies in the world. So that's something we need to stand behind.
Getting things back to normalcy has been a great thing for this country, considering the long drawn out political process definitely had brought in a level of economic slowdown. And so I think that at least getting people working on the regular was something of an achievement for Kenyans and the country at large.
Economic growth for quarter two improved significantly to 6.3% year-on-year compared to 5.7% in the first quarter. However, it was the strongest growth rate since the last quarter of 2016. Main drivers of the growth were agriculture at 5.6%, wholesale and retail trade at 7.7%, transportation and storage at 7.8%, while accommodation and restaurants registered a growth of 15.7%.
If we look at comparatively, during the electioneering period, there is normally a slowdown in the performance of some of the keys, particularly the manufacturing sector.
During the year, public debt breached the 5 trillion shillings mark, causing alarm over Kenya's repayment capacity.
We do need to relook at the aggressiveness with which we are borrowing in the market. If you look at our development projects which are ongoing, such as the standard gauge railway, the Lapset corridor, the new highway being built between Nairobi and Mombasa, you ask yourself if a lot of these expenditures can actually be phased out and allow them time to settle in, start generating revenue before starting another project.
However, the government continues to paint a positive picture about the 5.04 trillion shillings figure, saying that Kenya is not facing any debt distress crisis. National Treasury Cabinet Secretary Henry Rotich says Kenya still has more room to borrow before hitting the 70% debt to GDP ceiling.
What we feel as government is the right path. This is not just IMF is telling us to do this. It is us which we want to do it, because lower fiscal deficit obviously makes our debt sustainable. So that is a no-brainer. We don't need the IMF to tell us that.
The draft budget review and outlook paper tabled by National Treasury says public debt will jump to nearly 7.17 trillion shillings in the year ending June 2022. The government will spend 870 billion shillings on debt repayments in the current financial year, up from 435 billion shillings for the year ended June 2018.
You're going to reach a point where almost every shilling of revenue generated, 50 cents of it is going towards debt repayment rather than being put into development projects which will grow the economy in the long run and take us towards that 10% GDP growth level that we need to reach to a middle income economy.
In September, President Uhuru Kenyatta signed into law Finance Bill 2018, which caused widespread condemnation due to the introduction of 8% value-added tax on petroleum products, 1.5% levy for the National Housing Development Fund, and kerosene adulteration tax. The bill further increased excise on cash transfer from 12% to 20% and that of calls and data from 10 to 15%.
My emphasis would be to be more creative about it, to avoid some dangerous tax logic. So for instance, don't think of mobile money based on the fact of the betting revenues. There are other ways in which you're doing it or where you're collecting revenues that if you impose on people, you'll actually be harming them. And so there has to be very creative and well thought out ways so that you don't put the burden on the public.
Treasury hopes to ride on new taxes to fill a 67.5 billion shillings hole in this year's budget. Inflation remained within policy targets of below 7.5%, owing to good rainfall that saw improved food harvest as well as stable fuel prices. Aurora says growth momentum will likely be sustained in 2019 as healthy remittance inflows and tighter labor market drives solid private sector consumption, while upbeat business confidence will fuel a strong expansion in fixed investment.
Coming into 2019, largely expectations of a continued stable macroeconomic environment. Inflation has averaged 4.5% in the 10 months this year. Shilling, if you look at November 2017 to November 2018, it's been flat, 103.7 to 103.2. So a continued security has been good across the economy. So we expect that to continue. It's just how do we now spur credit growth back into the economy.
The National Treasury is upbeat that the economy will grow by 6% in 2018.
Well, let's now turn our focus to the agriculture sector, and a combination of factors continue to bedevil the sector. In the year 2018, it marked the crescendo of years of mismanagement in the sugar as well as the maize sector, where the price of the commodity became unbearable to the common man, as told by Judith Akolo.
The agriculture sector began on a high with the change of guard at the Ministry of Agriculture. The reshuffle saw Cabinet Secretary Mwangi Keonjuri leave the devolution docket to replace Willie Bett, who was appointed Kenya's High Commissioner to the Indian subcontinent. It was not long before the first blight hit the agriculture sector, following investigations by the Directorate of Criminal Investigations that revealed unbridled importation of sugar that was said to be contaminated with heavy metals.
You see the reports that have come from chemical analysis that have been done. Some of what we are selling around and mixing as sugar has got high contents of mercury, has got high contents of copper. No wonder you have the cases you have around the country, whether they are related to cancer or what have you. We have just been selling poison to our people. And people are making money, out of that, making money.
And we have therefore already given instructions to immediately destroy that sugar and make sure that it does not find its way into the market.
Denials by the Kenya Bureau of Standards that they had not passed contaminated sugar as fit for human consumption did not bear fruit.
I want to be very specific that no mercury has been detected in the samples that we have tested.
The DCI could hear none of this as the then KEBS Managing Director Charles Ongwae was arrested and later hauled into the police cells before being charged in court.
Count 2, count 3. Before Eric,
Meanwhile, the raids on suspected wholesalers handling suspected contaminated imported sugar continued to headline the news as Kenyans were taken aback as to what was happening. President Uhuru Kenyatta, while addressing Mashujaa Day celebrations in Kakamega County, directed the Agriculture Cabinet Secretary to work with local leaders in the sugar belt to ensure that a solution is found towards revamping the sugar sector.
Na ndipo nilisema waziri wa kilimo Bwana Kiunjuri, tujue ya kwamba sasa mchezo umeisha. Tafuta hawa watu ambao wanakula mali ya wengine, utuletee tufunge, ama wewe mwenyewe utakuwa na shida katika hiyo shida mambo.
A task force has since been formed headed by Cabinet Secretary Kiunjuri and Kakamega Governor Wycliffe Oparanya to make recommendations on how to lift the sugar sector from the doldrums.
And make appropriate accommodations, review importation and taxation structures in the sugar sector.
From now, we see hope coming to the farmers before Christmas. I'm sure this task force should have done its job. And we urge you to treat it with the urgency that it deserves. I think lives depend on this. An entire region and the country's economy depends on this.
While the wound that was the sugar subsector was still festering,
the cartels are sitting at Kenya Sugar Directorate.
In came the maize scandal.
Purchase price of a 90 kilogram bag of maize to NCPB will be Kenya shillings 3,200 with effect from Monday, 16 October 2017.
First, it was the suspension of the directors of the National Cereals and Produce Board by the Agriculture Principal Secretary, Richard Lesiampe.
All the three regional managers, regional manager of Lake Western Region, regional manager of North Rift, the regional manager of South Rift, are all hereby suspended until full investigations are conducted and those found culpable will be dealt with.
Then the Pandora's box that had been tightly shut flipped open, revealing the rot that had been concealed in the maize sector. An investigation by the Directorate of Criminal Investigations and the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission saw the tables turn, and the Principal Secretary and the directors of the National Cereals and Produce Board were hauled first to the EACC offices at Integrity Center before being taken to court and charged with misuse of funds. A year later, some maize farmers were yet to be paid for supplies to the National Cereals and Produce Board, while those who had not sold their maize continue to count losses as their produce remains in the stores due to lack of a market.
Sisi tumevetiwa all along, tumevetiwa wakati wa kuchukua mbolea, tumevetiwa wakati wa kudeliver, na sasa wakulima sisi tunasema tumeumia ya kutosha.
All these are said to be the effects of over-importation of the staple from regional countries as well as Latin America. On several occasions, President Kenyatta has had to read the Riot Act to the leadership at the Ministry of Agriculture.
Tulikuwa na zaidi ya shilingi bilioni 2 ya kulipa wakulima wetu wa mahindi, lakini kesho yake unasikia hiyo pesa mkulima hajalipwa, lakini unasikia kuna mkulima ati amedeliver kwa NCPB mahindi ya shilingi milioni 200. Jameni, niambieni ni nani? Mimi niko na shamba na sio ndogo. Niambie ni nani mkulima ambaye anakuza Kenya hii mahindi ya shilingi milioni 200?
Oftentimes, the Agriculture Cabinet Secretary Mwangi Kiunjuri has appeared before several committees of the Senate and the National Assembly to explain why farmers in the grain basket regions have lacked a market for their crop, while those that supplied maize have not been paid.
We expected that it's only the registered importers that will be able to enjoy the widow. Little did we know that there are other players that who came in.
To stem what appeared to be a situation that would get out of hand, the government in September directed millers to ensure that a 2-kilogram packet of flour does not sell for more than 75 shillings.
The position of the government is that a 2 kg unga packet should not retail at more than Kenya shillings 75. That is 75 shillings.
But the United Grain Millers Association could hear none of this, and they sprung up a surprise announcement saying they would increase the cost of flour owing to the rise in the cost of production.
Hii yenye tunaweza kununua na tuone tumepata faida ni tukinunua a 90 kg bag at 1,300. Tukinunua na more than that, we are just running the company and to keep.
Caught in between all these are the farmers whose livelihoods are on edge.
Nikitumia tu nguvu zangu na skili zangu kulima shamba miwa, lakini hata nimesomesha watoto wengine kwa miwa, lakini kufika wakati huu sasa hatuna mwelekeo, hatuna pale popote, tuko tu kama watu ambao hatuko Kenya. Sisi Western tumesauliwa.
The Blue Economy Conference and the launch of the Coast Guard heralds Kenya's best chance to revive the fishing and aquaculture sector, as this is now being viewed as a chance to boost the country's fish intake in order to realize food security. On the continental level, the African Union is mulling over creating a fund that will aid member states to curb post-harvest losses, mainly caused by aflatoxin contamination in staples.
We can, mobilize a fund for labs, to test the aflatoxin issue. But the country level member states should really be on board and take the leadership, after this proven the result of the 6 pilot project. The findings are there. We know that aflatoxin is really a serious thing. It's like Ebola. It's like HIV. It's because it causes human health, liver cancer, starting for children. All this. So I think it is really a national issue that the member states should need to take it seriously.
It has been a roller coaster in the agriculture sector, and what farmers will be hoping for is a turnaround in the new year so as to once again grow the sector that is both a source of food as well as job opportunities. For the year ending 2018, I'm Judith Akolo.
Now, away from the agriculture sector, it was during the KBC Presidential Roundtable held in mid-2018 that the government and private sector resolved to fight contraband goods that were hurting the local manufacturing industry as well as revenue collection. A multi-agency committee drawing membership from both government agencies and the private sector would spearhead the fight against contraband that culminated in President Uhuru Kenyatta setting ablaze illicit goods worth 1.5 billion shillings in Machakos. Reporter Benson Rioba has the details.
The government estimates that the country loses close to 200 billion shillings annually to contraband goods that flood the market. This has affected the private sector, who raised the issue during the KBC Presidential Roundtable held in May, with government agencies and the private sector trading accusations on who was funding the proliferation of contraband goods in Kenya. Multi-agency committee drawing membership from both public and private sector officials was formed to fight the vice.
We really all need to up our game. We as government, but also you as private sector, must also recognize that there is no natural market out there anymore. You have to fight for every single space going forward.
Despite the success of the committee to combat the illicit trade, Kenyans were treated to a circus after Interior Cabinet Secretary Dr. Fred Matiang'i claimed that tests carried out by the government chemist on 1,400 bags of illicit sugar impounded in Eastleigh, Nairobi County revealed the sweetener was contaminated by mercury and lead.
When you see the reports that have come from chemical analysis that have been done, some of what we are selling around and mixing as sugar has got high contents of mercury, has got high contents of copper. No wonder you have the cases you have around the country, whether they are related to cancer or what have you. We have just been selling poison.
This will be dismissed by the then Industry, Trade and Enterprise Development Cabinet Secretary Adan Mohamed and the then Kenya Bureau of Standards Managing Director Charles Ongwae, who later on admitted that tests carried on the sweetener showed above levels of copper and lead.
I have asked my counterpart, the Minister for Interior, who has been quoted by the media, that the sugar that has been caught and captured has traces of mercury, to see where those reports come from and what tests have been done to demonstrate that.
Ongwae was later on arrested and charged in court alongside other KBC high-ranking officials in connections to proliferations of contraband goods. This resulted in the Kenya Bureau of Standards embarking on a more rigorous inspection and testing all sugar at points of entry, which was a break from the past where only small sample of sugar and goods were tested to ascertain their standards. As the sugar debacle raged on, in a show of intent, President Uhuru Kenyatta presided over the destruction of property worth 1.5 billion shillings at the Portland Cement Grounds in Machakos County. During the event, some 149 motor vehicles valued at more than 70 million shillings were destroyed, along with other contraband goods that had been nabbed, ranging from laboratory equipment, personal care products, cigarettes, electronics, alcoholic drinks, and assorted foodstuffs. While officiating the exercise, President Kenyatta warned unscrupulous traders against importing illicit goods into the country, adding that the government will step up surveillance, border entry points, and nab perpetrators.
Viwanda vyetu vifungwe na watu wachache kwa sababu ya mfuko yao wawe wanaweza kuendelea na biashara haramu ambaye inanyang'anya maelfu ya vijana kazi ambayo wangepata. Wewe ukilete, usifikiri utatisha mwenzako au hii ni mali ya pesa mingi, tutaimaliza. Tutaiponda vile mmeona. Hiyo ndiyo njia pekee ambayo tutakuwa nchi ambayo ni nchi tajiri na ambayo watu wetu wamekaa kwa njia ya ustaarabu. Na waomba wa Kenya kwa nidhamu na kwa heshima, wenzetu tusikubali vita yetu kati ya mambo haya ambaye inatuharibia taifa letu na nchi yetu.
The fight against contraband elicited a lot of focus on the points of entry, with operations at the port of Mombasa coming under increased scrutiny. It will see the board of directors of the Kenya Ports Authority send on compulsory leave several senior managers, among them the then managing director Catherine Muturi, who later opted to voluntarily resign from the post. Several senior managers were shuffled, with others opting to leave through early retirement. The government then ordered more verification of imported goods, a process that was slower and will see traders complain that they were incurring more demurrage as a result of slow cargo clearance process. However, private sector leaders were quick to remind their colleagues that the noble process was aimed at ridding the market of contrabands that were eating into their businesses and revenue. President Kenyatta will challenge all governors to step up efforts in counties to combat trade in contraband goods. This emerged at the time when the Kenya Revenue Authority put into use its 17 billion shillings accessible goods management system that's designed to detect counterfeit liquor and tobacco. The system's design features tracking of products by incorporation into the production chain of manufacturers, as well as authentication features verifiable by consumers. By use of excise stamps, the system, which is fitted in the production chain, allows the taxman to track how much alcohol each liquor farm produces. To this end, in May 2018, the taxman managed to impound and destroy 3,900 liters of illicit liquor worth 15 million shillings in Kisumu County. The liquor that lacked carrier-approved stamps had been smuggled into the country through non-gazetted routes from the neighboring countries. Later, the anti-contraband teams would raid a private residence in Kasarani, Nairobi County, and managed to net an assortment of counterfeit liquor worth 1.2 million shillings as it intensified its crackdown on illegal liquor.
Trucking of crude oil from Turkana to Mombasa was probably the biggest news of the energy sector this year. The tracking process that kicked off mid this year inched Kenya closer to becoming a crude oil exporter. This, as well as the revision of electricity tariffs by the Energy Regulatory Commission, which saw fixed charges scrapped and hiking of pump price of kerosene, that from September saw kerosene become costlier than diesel, as well as the introduction of an 8% value-added tax on petroleum products. Our reporter, Gran Iteva, has the details.
Mid this year, Kenya launched tracking of crude oil from oil wells in Turkana County to Mombasa to accumulate enough stocks for export. President Uhuru Kenyatta flagged off oil tankers ferrying the crude oil under the early oil pilot scheme that Kenya is expected to use to gain experience before commercial crude oil production starts in the year 2022. The early oil pilot scheme was, among others, expected to test the temperature at which the crude oil would flow and other technical aspects crucial in designing the heated crude oil pipeline ahead of commercial production slated to begin in 2022. Initially, about 600 barrels per day were being transported, although Tala Oil had indicated that the volumes would progressively be increased to 2,000 barrels per day under the trucking scheme. The trucking process, however, ran into headwinds after Turkana residents blocked the ferrying of the crude oil by trucks to demand a share of revenue from the oil, improved security, as well as more jobs and tenders from farms engaged in crude oil production before operations could resume.
We have issues to do with the jobs. Our people have been denied jobs.
The Turkana community, the contractor, and the ministry to come together and establish these structures.
The stalemate persisted for more than a month, with Talo Oil threatening to shut down operations. Trucking services resumed late August after representatives from the Petroleum Ministry, Talo Oil and Turkana County held talks with residents, urging them to allow the early oil pilot scheme to continue as their grievances are addressed. As at early December, Petroleum Cabinet Secretary John Muñoz indicated that about 48 barrels had been ferried to storage tanks at the Kenya Petroleum Refineries Limited. According to Muñoz, Kenya was targeting to accumulate 200,000 barrels before the first export was made, and he projected that this was likely to happen in June 2019. The cost of kerosene was the other highlight in the energy sector in the year 2018. In mid-June, National Treasury Cabinet Secretary Henry Rotich proposed the introduction of an anti-adulteration levy on kerosene, an effort by the government to reduce cases of mixing of super petrol and diesel with paraffin. The passage of the Finance Bill 2018 in September saw the price of kerosene cost more than diesel.
As a country that is also entering into the medium and developed countries, we should be relying less and less on IMF facilities, especially if you have...
Obviously, when you tax fuel, you'll have some inflationary pressure, but then we need the money. So what I think we should ask ourselves is, what do we do with the money that we get from taxing fuel?
According to the Petroleum Institute of East Africa, the government loses 34 billion shillings annually to unscrupulous business people who mix kerosene with diesel to reap Kenyans of huge amounts of money at the expense of making incredible returns from the act. Increased levies on kerosene was preceded by suits by government officials on depots involved in fuel adulteration. Still on fuel, there was a public outcry after the government implemented a 16% value-added tax on petroleum products in September. This was after the expiry of the 2-year grace period of nil VAT on petroleum products.
I do not see any impact of the reduction to 8% because the damage has already been done.
I think the government should go slow and learn to also consult.
However, President Uhuru Kenyatta intervened by proposing that the VAT on petroleum products be reduced by half to 8%. Chaotic scenes would be witnessed in Parliament during debate on the Finance Bill 2018 that contained proposals about VAT on petroleum products.
The question, which is that new clause they now read a second time. I put the question, which is a new clause 8 second. There's other people say aye. The ayes have it.
Despite controversies in the National Assembly, the bill was passed by the August House and signed into law by President Kenyatta, resulting in lower palm prices.
I don't agree totally with the president. The 8% should not be there.
The Kenyans have spoken. They don't want this increment because they are not able to sustain themselves. The economy is doing very badly.
In August, the Energy Regulatory Commission harmonized electricity tariffs that would have a huge impact on the middle-class households. With the new billing structure from the Commission, the middle-class group's power cost rose to up to 54% from August of 2018. On the other hand, the poor households and the rich who consume less than 10 units and 1,500 units of electricity respectively benefited from a reduced power cost. In the new billing structure, the ERC also scrapped standing charge of 150 shillings for every meter as a counteractive measure on billing fluctuations, especially for customers on prepaid meters.
The more you consume, the cheaper it is for you. And again, the tariff structure is been designed in such a way that, for instance, if you are Lifeline, you've been consuming below 10 units per month. You will be able to be migrated to the next level after 3 months. And if you are under domestic ordinary category and you consume much more, initially our tariff structure was designed that the more you consumed, if you consume 1,500, you are penalized more.
Kenya Power hit the headlines over outage of the prepaid billing system that plunged some customers into darkness, as well as erroneous bills. Officials would be summoned to face various parliamentary committees to explain to error. This would later be followed by 8 top officials as well as former managing director Dr. Ben Chumo being arrested and charged in court with conspiracy to commit economic crimes and abuse of office. The officials were accused of irregularly awarding a tender for procurement of defective transformers and irregularities pre-qualifying 525 companies for labor and transport contracts. Through the 2 tenders, Kenyans are projected to have lost 470 million shillings in addition to the inconveniences caused by defective transformers. Brian Itava, Channel 1 Business.
Let's now turn our focus on to the aviation industry, where 2018 was seemingly a good year for the aviation, characterized by, among others, the launch of direct flights between Kenya and the US, as well as the country scoring highly on the safety in audit conducted by the International Civil Aviation Organization. Several charter flights as well as commercial airlines either launched flights or increased frequencies to Kenyan airports, as narrated by Regina Manyaragatau.
Kenya has the largest aviation infrastructure in the East African community, boasting 5 international airports in Nairobi, Mombasa, Kisumu, Eldoret, and Isiolo.
Air transport with support services contribute about 0.4% of our country's gross domestic product, translating into a turnover of approximately 232.7 million. In 2017, additionally, our main airport supports over 17,000 direct jobs for Kenyans and an additional 600,000 indirectly, making it a nerve center for our national economy.
Perhaps the biggest highlight of 2018 in the aviation industry was the launch of direct flights between Nairobi to New York. This was after the Federal Aviation Administration granted Jomo Kenyatta International Airport a Category 1 status, which was a culmination of a long journey that started way back in 2010 by the Kenya Civil Aviation Authority. The country scored 78% on the safety audit, which was an improvement from the previous score of 66% in 2008. Being a catalyst to other sectors such as tourism, manufacturing, horticulture, and the hospitality industry, the direct flights between Kenya and the US was deemed a game changer.
You have more chances of more traffic, in particular if you co-share with Delta. It means that US authorities or US government can travel on KQ, who is now a Delta flight. So there'll be more traffic in 2019 once we sign the co-share.
The Nairobi-New York route will also impact the Kenya economy directly. The route will boost trade in both directions significantly.
According to the tourism industry players, the direct flight will have a direct impact on the Kenyan economy, as it is expected to generate jobs by boosting trade between Kenya and the US, both in terms of goods and services.
It's a learning process for us to enter on this market, but as soon as commercially that's going to be viable, we will immediately start looking at the other cities and flying to other places into the US and maybe even in North America.
Tourists from North and South America generally connect to Kenya and Africa through Europe or Asia, making the duration of their trip about 24 hours. However, with the direct flights, the travel time will reduce drastically to 15 hours. The Kenya Tourism Board anticipates that the reduced travel time will make Kenya the preferred long-distance destination.
Is where we'll get our numbers as targeted to 2.5 million and eventually by 2030 to have 5 million arrivals.
However, Kenya Airways announced that it would reduce the number of flights on the New York route from 7 to 5 a week as a strategic business decision.
This is opening, if we go one day to Atlanta, we'll probably do KQ004 and 005. We have this setup. So this is also a symbolic new opening of a new geographic area in our system.
Kenya Airways CEO Sebastian Miscos said the frequency adjustment was made as part of the airline's routine operation review based on seasonality, as the listed firm looks to ensure that travel demands were met. The domestic air travel market saw rising demand in 2018, with the Western Kenya route particularly registering increased activities as domestic airlines increased frequency to cash in on demand. 3 airlines launched or increased flights to Kisumu International Airport, stepping up competition for established carriers such as Kenya Airways, Jambojet, Fly 540 and Britex Airlines. Freedom Airline Express started its maiden flights to Kisumu in May. The latest airline to operate the route is SafariLink Aviation Limited, bringing the number of players to 7. To counter budding competition, Jambojet increased frequency on the Nairobi-Kisumu route by 4 to 24 flights weekly.
An interest in this region. We have already almost 3 charters from the Italian market. We have 4 charters from the Polish market. We are going to have 1 charter from Netherlands.
Domestic flights to the coastal circuit also increased on account of a boom in conference tourism, providing a boon to investors in the beach area.
If the local community gets something out of tourism, whether it's infrastructure improvements, whether it's economical benefits, this is when tourism really makes good.
Domestic flights to the coastal circuit also increased on account of a boom in conference tourism, providing a boon to investors in beach. The latest entrant is Qatar Airways in December, whose inaugural flight saw Kenya receive visitors mainly from her key European tourist source markets such as Italy, Germany, United Kingdom and France. In October, after a 5-year break, TUI Fly resumed its flights from Brussels. Since the launch of the Charter Incentive Program in 2016, Kenya has recorded a growth of tourism arrivals into the coastal region. The number of charters is likely to increase as 2 more charters are expected to start service to Mombasa.
Since 2016 to now, we have spent 200 million Kenya shillings, but the value that we have brought into the country is $37 million.
2018 ended on a high for the industry after Kenya played host to the 11th ICANN conference. Gracing the occasion was President Uhuru Kenyatta, who urged African states to open up their skies to foster travel among African countries that is still slow.
Kenya continues to play her role in the formulation and implementation of initiatives adopted for the safe, secure and sustainable civil aviation system throughout the African continent. These initiatives are aimed at improving air connectivity, reducing cost of air transport, and ensuring the sustainable development of air transport in Africa that will further improve service delivery.
Going forward, Kenya is keen on sustaining the growth of the aviation industry by building the capacity that will enable Kenyans fully tap the potential.
FAA instructors are also going to train our trainers so that eventually we Kenyans are going to train the rest of Africa the FAA programs.
According to the Kenya Civil Aviation Authority Director General Captain Gilbert Kibe, this would be through tapping experts from the US, Singapore and South Korea, riding on aviation trading partnerships signed with the 3 countries. Regina Manyara Gitao reporting for the 2018 End Year in Review.
Let's now have a look at what shaped the world internationally. And the business world in 2018 culminated with major corporate milestones and sovereign economic news that rocked the world economies. Among the highlights was a trade war between the United States of America and its Asian ally China that dragged on for several months, as well as Apple becoming the first US company to reach a $1 trillion market capitalization. Alan Aoko has more details.
A near-bankrupt computer maker evolved into the most valuable publicly traded company in the United States, pushing the tech industry away from big, bulky machines and producing some of the world's most popular consumer products like the iMac, the iPod, and the iPhone. Apple's products have reshaped everyday life. In early August, Apple stock hit $207.39 per share, giving it a market capitalization of $1.002 trillion. In a memo sent to Apple employees, CEO Tim Cook called the valuation a significant milestone, but added that it wasn't the most important measure of the company's success. The valuation cemented the iPhone maker's new status as a $1 trillion company and the first US public company to hit that level.
The truth is, I don't think about it, to be really honest. What I view a stock price to be a result of doing other things well.
Closer home in Africa, in March in Kigali, Rwanda, the African Continental Free Trade Area was signed. 44 African countries at a summit organized by the African Union signed the deal. The summit was largely seen as a step forward for the African Union's Agenda 2063 project for closer African integration. This happened with 27 member states also signing a commitment for the free movement of persons. The African Continental Free Trade Area has the potential to bring over at least 1.2 billion of the continent's people together in the same market. The bloc of 55 nations will be the largest in the world by member states. The agreement commits countries to removing tariffs on 90% of goods, with 10% of sensitive items to be phased in later. It will also liberalize trade in services and might in the future include free movement of people and a single currency. However, some countries were yet to sign and ratify the deal by the time of going to press.
Africa's colonial heritage is an infrastructure that runs from the sources of minerals to the ports for export. And Africa's urban centers have developed along this trajectory of railways and roads from the copper mines of Kasese, from the diamond mines of Shinyanga to the port cities. Now, Africa's integration now requires an infrastructure that moves from an African country to an African country, not an African mineral deposit to an African port.
Elsewhere, bilateral relations between the two largest economies deteriorated in a feud that lasted several months. In June 2018, the United States fired the first shot when the White House said that it would impose tariffs of 25% on $50 billion worth of Chinese goods. The announcement confirmed a threat made by the US President Donald Trump in March and followed months of trade talks between the two countries. A truce was announced in May, but it proved shaky and short-lived. In June, the US president said the new tariffs were designed to punish China for an alleged theft of American intellectual property and technology. He further warned that any retaliation by China will trigger another round of tariffs on Chinese goods. The Chinese government, on its part, however, said it will respond in kind to the US tariffs, which would apply to roughly 1,100 exports and will target China's aerospace, robotics, manufacturing and auto industries. China retaliated, imposing higher tariffs on 545 US items worth $34 billion, including agricultural products, automobiles and seafood. In December, President Trump and Xi Jinping agreed to a temporary truce suspending tariff hikes for 90 days.
We hope that the U.S. could give more thoughts to the immediate interest of the two people and do more and say more to promote China-U.S. relations and people's well-being instead of the contrary.
And in Europe, jitters about Brexit dominated headlines. The United Kingdom may leave the European Union in March 2019, with a deal that has been seen as vague in that it gives companies and investors no greater clarity on the future. Many companies put investments on hold following the vote for Brexit because of uncertainty of facing new regulations, tariffs or custom checks at the borders. Businesses are unsure of whether they will be able to move staff between the European Union and the United Kingdom or be forced to pay the new taxes. For example, German car maker BMW said in September that it will shut down its Mini factory in England for 1 month of maintenance immediately after Brexit because it could not be sure of getting the parts it needs.
You've now got a situation where there's a division in Parliament, in the government, actually even in the cabinet, certainly in the country, and you've got two different versions of Brexit on offer. You've got, if you like, the Brexit version Theresa May's putting forward. And, by the way, I respect her completely. It's a hugely difficult position she's in. But the problem with her version of Brexit is it doesn't really please the people who advocated Brexit most strongly.
Finally, prosecutors in Japan formally charged the former Nissan chairman Carlos Ghosn with underreporting his income by tens of millions of pounds as the fallout from the scandal threatened to engulf other senior executives. Ghosn, whose arrest in November rocked the Japanese car industry and cast doubts over the future of Nissan's alliance with Renault. With the help of another Nissan executive, Greg Kelly, Ghosn, who was sacked as Nissan chairman days after his arrest, allegedly hid about £35 million in income over a 5-year period to March 2015. Both Kelly and Ghosn were likely to be in custody for long, a move that could add to international criticism of aggressive tactics being employed by Japan's powerful public prosecutors. Experts say Nissan could find it difficult to avoid blame for the scandal, given the possibility that other executives had knowledge of Gossen's misconduct or that the firm's internal controls failed to spot the misreported income.
2018 presented an exciting time for business across sectors, with highs and lows recorded here and there, as you might have seen in our end-year review.
And of course, you had a roundup of all events that shaped the business world in the year 2018, and we look forward to update you more in the year 2019. My name is O'Brien Kimani. Always a pleasure to see you, and we look forward for more engagement with you. My Twitter handle is @O'Brien Kimani.
And I'm Regina Manyara Guitar, and you can reach me on Twitter @Ray Manyara and at Facebook @Ray Manyara. It is always to have you on board, and as far as business is concerned, right here on KBC Channel 1. Do have yourself a prosperous 2019.
See you next year, which is about less than 5 hours from now.